to debate Brad from Macon on the Finebaum Show. And this was spectacular, ladies and gentlemen, just spectacular. Ari versus Brad from Macon, the debate to end all debates. The folks at the Finebaum Show, incredibly gracious. They've let us use some clips from this show because it was a barn burner. River, let's play the intro to this thing.
Hell out of here.
My whole problem with you, Ari, is that you call Paul an existential threat to college football. And the way we see it down here, you're the existential threat with college football, trying to get teams in this playoff and writing about teams that have no strength of schedule. They have no recruiting. All three teams we're talking about are in the 60s and the 70s in recruiting. They don't have the players. They don't have the money. They don't have the facilities. And so you're trying to put them in there. And I'm sorry, if you want a Georgia TCU over and over and over again, that's what you're going to get. And down here, that smoke ain't going to float.
First of all, Paul, I don't even know if we ever talked about this, but I never said that you as a human being are an existential threat. I thought that your point of view in that moment was. So I don't know if that's the way that people took that, but that's not what I wrote.
I love Brad just comes off the top rope. Wham! Existential threat. You. How dare you suggest that Indiana should have made the playoff? How dare you, Ari?
So for people who don't know, because I don't know if we told them, I see somebody in the chat was wondering, Brad from Macon is a person who would routinely call into Finebaum after my appearances this past season and like call me a little tenor and like freak out. So they're like, I'm like, I'll debate this guy because, you know, I kind of get a little amusement out of it. And the thing is that I'll say is I like the passion that they have down there, right? Like that's the thing. Like
Brad was amazing. Like Brad brought it the entire time.
He's a cartoon character of every SEC fan out there, right? Like that's what people
Here's where I'm disappointed in you though, Ari, because right off the bat, when he mentions Indiana and their recruiting and all that, first of all, he uses the Stars Matter argument on you, and you don't come back with, I invented Stars Matter. Who the hell do you think you're talking to? But what shouldn't you have mentioned? And I realize we were at the game. This was some garbage time stuff. But who lost by more to Notre Dame in the playoff? By more points? Yeah. Indiana or Brad's Georgia Bulldogs?
Yeah. You know, and like it's like when you have 10 minutes to talk to somebody who's screaming at you, it's like you definitely don't get everything off your chest that you want to get off your chest. But here's the other thing too. Like when you're talking to a person from that point of view and you listen to the entire interview, he never made a single factual point that it was a caricature of an argument. And like the idea that Indiana shouldn't have been in the playoff isn't even a rational thought because it wasn't a discussion. That wasn't even a discussion.
It ain't about what you say. It's about how it makes you feel.
Yeah.
But here's where I was very impressed with you because you kept it together and you just kept coming at him. So here's the part I loved that you would not let go of, and I'm glad you didn't let go.
The thing that I wanted to ask you, though, and I'm going to ask it over and over and over again until you answer my question, is if you think the committee was negligent and didn't do the right thing, which was Paul's platform or discussion point at the time when there were blowoffs in the first round, what do you think they should have done? Disregarded all the results and just put the teams in from the South that you like? I don't understand what's going on here.
No, not at all.
What's the result? What's the resolution to your problem?
Some of the teams, they got to build parameters on how you get into the playoff, number one. And putting Boise State in there, especially with a first-round bye, is the biggest bunch of bull crap I've ever seen in my life. So what they're going to have to do is put parameters in there. And number one, did the committee screw up and put some teams in there that shouldn't have been there? You damn right they did. And
what is your solution to the problem, Brad? What should they have done last year? What is your solution to the problem from last year? What should they have done that they didn't do that you got mad about? What do you think they should have done?
Number one, they should have left Indiana out because they didn't play a
For who, Brad?
Indiana. They should have left them out because they had no top 25 wins. They had one game on the schedule, and they got the damn brakes beat off of them. Put in Ole Miss.
So he finally got to Ole Miss. Like, you only saw about a few seconds of that.
I was an owl. Ooh, 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 ooh.
There were multiple minutes of Ari just saying, name a team that you would rather have seen other than Indiana. and he finally got Ole Miss out of his mouth. And I actually, like I said, I told Paul this because they had me on to recap, and I thought choosing Ole Miss rather than Alabama or South Carolina threads the needle nicely. If you're Brad, because you can make better arguments for Ole Miss, I think. But why didn't you just come back with why can't they beat Kentucky at home? Like,
I mean, I didn't say who they lost to, but I said they lost to a bottom half team by 100 in the SEC.
Weren't they Kentucky's only SEC win?
Who?
Ole Miss was Kentucky's only SEC win, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Ole Miss. Yeah. It's just like the thing too is, and we get into it, but it's just like, okay, man, like if you want that to happen, like here's the sickest thing, Andy, is that he was throwing how I used to feel out there as fact now, and like I actually still kind of think this is going to be a banana land thing to say. But like if Ole Miss got hot and into the playoff, they could have played for the national title.
Because they had a roster capable of it. Yeah,
so
no.
What you're arguing, I didn't even fundamentally disagree that and I said this on the show that Ole Miss wasn't more talented than Indiana. But the thing that we have to do in the sport to stay in reality is to use the results of the field to dictate who earns a spot. So I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding of what the playoff committee is supposed to do.
Well, he also didn't understand that the committee had no choice with what they did with Boise State.
Yeah, like it's also part of the rules. So like if you're an anti-expansionist, then that's what you are. But you're the thing that my pet peeve in life is when people throw out problems and they don't have the solution to it. All they do is problem, and there's no solution to that problem. And if your solution is nonsense, then your problem, it can't be taken seriously. You have to have a solution that is rational, and changing the rules and not letting Boise in it's not planet Earth. And then putting in a team that lost to Kentucky in 3 times, you have to earn the right to play for a national championship. It's not let's make a playoff that has the most competitive games. It's select the teams that earn the right to be there. Like the regular season still is a thing. And if you don't do your part in the regular season, then you don't earn the right, even if you are a very deep and talented team, to compete in the next stage of things. So, like, to me, my number one thing has always been, like, do I think for sure that they got the best 12 teams in at the end of last year who were playing the best football? I think you could have made the case that South Carolina and made a real case that South Carolina would have been more equipped to compete with Penn State and Notre Dame in the first round. There's no question about it, right? Like, But South Carolina, through its own fault, maybe not even so much its own fault, Lenore Sellister got hurt in one of their losses that eliminated.
And the LSU game, there's a heavy, the refs stole that one contingent among the South Carolina fan base. Yeah.
So if you don't adhere to losing 3 times as a punitive thing, then we're playing games for no reason. And that is the existential threat to football. It's not Finebaum. It's not irrational fans who want to come and scream at me. The problem is that we have to adhere to the guidelines of the sport, or we're going to tell 90% of the people who follow the sport and listen to the show that the games.
Your percentages are way off, by the way. You just said that SEC fans encompass 10%. Yeah, it's okay. In terms of actual interest in college football, the people who care about the SEC, probably more like 35 to 40%.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right. I mean, like,
and the Big Ten, probably more like 40%.
Yeah, 90% of teams, because Indiana's in the Big Ten, so it's not just Big Ten. Like you're alienating Indiana's fan base. You're alienating Minnesota's, Michigan State's, everybody that is a team that could be good but isn't a blue blood. You're saying even if you win the games that are on your schedule, that it doesn't matter. Like, you cannot do that. That is all the things that we talk about, and NIL. We talk about the expansion and the seeding of the playoff and revenue sharing and all the things that are changing in college football. The only existential threat, because you don't hear me say that often. I don't say that. I'm not a the world's ending kind of guy, am I? But no. if you got to a point where Brad's reality was actually not a Looney Tunes show and actually became true, then what you'd be saying is, unless you win your conference, you were going to give it to the SEC. So that means that Arizona State's, if they would have, or
Well, they won
Arizona
their
State was an
conference.
automatic, but like all the games that were played by teams like
SMU.
Colorado and SMU and Indiana and all the teams that were on the bubble at the end of the year, that, hey, were they as good as South Carolina and Ole Miss? Maybe not. But what's more important? What's more important, assembling a good team or being a good team? And I actually push back at the notion that Ole Miss would just roll over Indiana. They could. Ole Miss had the potential to win the national title, bud. Like, you and I were at the Oxford, blowout of Georgia. And we were on the field after the game. I'm like, holy shit, that's a team that could go do this whole thing. So, like, you're not educating me on Stars Matter. Like, I get it, pal. I know Juice Wells is good. I know Prescorn's good.
It was just funny watching Brad basically be Ari circa 2019.
You know what Brad was doing?
Versus Ari circa 2025.
But Brad was arguing against the expansion of the playoff without realizing it.
Well, right, because he kept bringing up how many times the SEC had won. Well, if you ask the folks in the Big Ten, they would say, well, the SEC won because they didn't have to go through the grinder or the gamut. Now, I think the SEC would have won the national title a lot of those years.
Oh, for sure. No, the SEC won because they had the best teams all those years.
Yeah.
But if the sport has changed and they don't unequivocally have the best teams every year, they probably will most years still.
Right.
The best players are still in the
This system's going to make it different. Like, this system is going to, there's going to be some luck involved. Like, this year, the best team won. Like, the best roster won. I don't know that it's always going to be like that as you go forward.
And, like, also, too, like, we talked to Cole Kublik, who's going to be on the show next week, and he made a point that I wanted to bring up here now. It's just like, you look at next year's top 15, and it's like, who do you think is going to win the national title? It's like, oh, I don't know. Like 4 years ago, you could be like, it's going to be Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, or Clemson. And you would have been right 90% of the time.
And I would argue that this is more fun than that. Like, us not knowing now.
And that's the thing that's made me second guess my expansion stuff. Because my anti-expansion stuff was from the Brad point of view. It was, why are we making it 12 when there's only 4 that can get in?
But you needed the NIL transfer rule change. You needed that to change the dynamics of talent acquisition.
Because if they would have done this in 2016, it would have been dumb. It would have been dumb. It might have been more entertaining.
Right. Your 8 seeds just getting slaughtered
every time.
Yeah.
Unless the 8 seed is a Georgia team that had an injury that, caused them to lose an extra game and they still got in. But, you can't, that's the thing too. And that's what Doug got mad at you about. It's like, you can't go, well, there's more players in the NFL that we know there's better players in SEC's world. We know that the teams have better players.
You said that. And the thing is, I thought you made an interesting point. We talked about this a while. I don't even think we talked about this on the show, but you brought up, what if the NFL does not take more players from the SEC this year? What if in sometime in the next 2-3 years that finally changes? And I'm very curious to see it. Like, I
actually don't think it's going to, man. I think that the SEC is still going to predominantly have the best players because predominantly the best players exist in the high school ranks or in the South.
Will they be clustered more across the 16?
Yeah,
rather than concentrated among 4.
Will there be more players? That's the question, first of all. And I think that we already saw that happen last year. But then also, too, will there be more players from Atlanta playing for Clemson? Will there be more players from Atlanta playing at Arizona State and USC and all those things?
Clemson's a bad example. It's 2 hours from Atlanta. But yeah,
that was a terrible example. And I realized I said it. I was like, I'm not good at geography. I'm like, yeah, I think they concentrate on Atlanta pretty good. But you know what I'm saying? Like, not traditional SEC. It's not just a breeding ground, but like, will Mississippi State have more is also a good thing. But like,
correct. Arkansas,
we cannot do is, could you imagine if what Brad wanted happened last year and they put Ole Miss in and South Carolina in and left SMU out and Indiana out? Like, what the message that would have sent? Like, don't you think that would have been
I don't know. The games might have been better in the first round.
They might have been better, but what message? Like, that's the thing. Focus on the message. Because like Brad might actually be right and say, yeah, well, you don't want TCU or Georgia again. Put Ole Miss in, and then Ole Miss comes in and they're fired up to get in, and they're awesome, and they beat the crap out of somebody in the first round.
Or the Ole Miss that lost to Florida and Kentucky shows up and they get their doors blown.
I know,
but
if Georgia Ole Miss shows up, they could go to the title game and play with Ohio State.
Yeah. All right.
So like
before we let Brad go, we need to because I feel like we've piled on Brad a little bit here. I want everybody to see Brad's finest moment because this was awesome.
Brad, let's slow down here. I think we've exhausted that question. And what I want to know, Brad, beyond that specific question, you seem to have a real beef with Ari Wasserman. You mention his name kind of funny. So I'm going to let you ask Mr. Wasserman a question since he asked you one. Go ahead, ask him a question.
Sure.
I mean, you know something, here's the thing. We know you're a beat writer for the Ohio State at one time in your career.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you still got that red mustache right above your lip where you drank all the Kool-Aid for the Big Ten. And I'm just telling you right now, you need to wash it off.
The teams in question here aren't even in the Big Ten. Outside of Indiana, it was a one-loss team. What are you talking about?
No, the Ohio State. Yeah, you're pro Little 10, and that's the way you are. Or you're pro Little 10, and you're going to beat them up, and then you're going to sit there and try to pull us down. Well, we're not believing that smoke because
hey Brad.
Did you watch the Super Bowl, Art? 33 players were from the SEC versus the Big Ten with 21. Did you see that? We're sick and tired of being the Little 10's farm system down here.
Can I ask you just a question that doesn't even have to do with college football and just in general? Who do you think is more likely to be biased on this topic? The person who listens to the Finebaum Show every day and is sitting with a Georgia pullover, or the guy who went to Arizona and lives in Dallas?
That's the one thing.
The red mustache line. Because here's the part that impressed me about Brad that I just, because I remember the first few times I went on TV, and I realized Brad's called into the show a few times, but this was a level of showcase that Brad has not gotten on the Finebaum Show before. The first few times I went on TV were miserable. I was awful. I was so nervous. I was so scared to say anything. Like, Brad is coming full bore. He's coming up with this stuff off the top of his head. That was impressive. Like, Brad with reps is a good show host.
Yeah, the only thing Brad needs is to inject some facts into his
I'm not sure that matters. Like,
it doesn't. No, not anymore.
I'm not sure it matters.
Like, the thing that was interesting is that, like, that was his finest moment on the show, and it was a funny thing to say. But if you listen to the 13-minute spot, like, he didn't say one thing that was factually accurate. So like that to me is like,
again, in this day and age, does that matter on television?
And do you know what it felt like to me? And I might have said this to you off air or on it, I can't remember, but I play poker a lot, right? You know, and when you're playing poker, there's a certain understanding if somebody is raising in a spot, or if somebody is, you know, that a player that you're playing against is going to be clinging to some sort of rubric of what to be doing. Like, there's certain expectations and ranges you can put somebody on.
Even blackjack is like this. If you have somebody at the table who's not playing basic strategy, you get mad at them because you're now not going to get the cards you expect to get.
I'll tell you, one time I almost got my ass kicked at a Vegas blackjack table before, but in poker specifically, you make moves and decisions based on a certain level of credit that you're giving to your opponent. So if your opponent is raising, you have to think, well, you know, in this spot, they didn't raise in this spot. They raised in this spot. They called here. You're doing gymnastics in your head. But if the person you're playing against doesn't know how to play, then sometimes you're assigning significance to moves that they do when they don't know what they're doing, which then causes you to not know what's happening and lose. Like, I think a professional poker player playing against an erratic human that could have anything is a harder thing to do sometimes than playing against somebody who's good at the game. So like, that's what it was like. I was like, I didn't know what this man was going to say to me. Like, and but like, the one thing I knew was not going to happen, because it doesn't exist, was a rational counterpoint of what the committee did wrong and what they could have done to fix it. Because you want to know why? It doesn't exist. No one.
So Elsu Sabo in the chat says this is Dunning-Kruger effect, which and she goes on to say it means you're too stupid to understand how stupid you are, which is a good definition of the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger is irrational overconfidence about something you have very little knowledge about. And I don't think that's what this was with Brad. It was in terms of the argument, but see, I'm looking at it in terms of someone who runs a show. What Brad did was great television. Brad created great television. I don't care if he was right. I care if it was fun.
The producer of the of the Finebaum Show knows what they're doing. And like
Yeah.
the thing that I was a little bit afraid of, and maybe this kind of happened a little bit, was going on the show and arguing with somebody who's being irrational makes you look stupid yourself. And I'm not even saying that Brad is stupid. I think he has a very narrow point of view of, I don't think he's stupid. He has a very narrow point of view of what he thinks it should look like, and he disregards all facts as it pertains to whether or not that fits his viewpoint, which happens a lot in all walks of life. But like arguing in that scenario is difficult because I'm trying to have a rational conversation with somebody who's being irrational, and then it makes me look like I'm irrational.
Well, you are irrational sometimes.
And I
Let's be
am
real here.
sometimes.